October 24, 1929. A date that carved itself into the spine of American history. By noon, Wall Street felt less like the financial heart of the world and more like a burning engine with no one at the controls. In just 6 hours, the United States lost $14 billion, a figure so enormous that it exceeded the entire Canadian economy at the time. Phones rang non-stop, but most calls never connected. Brokers shouted orders no one could hear. Panic spread faster than information. It was as if the country's most important communication artery had been cut. 13 million shares changed hands that day, not because people wanted to trade, but because they were desperate to escape. And yet, behind this avalanche of fear, behind the numbers and charts and screaming crowds, few Americans knew a simple, chilling truth. The crash that shattered millions of lives began with the decisions of one man. A man newspapers once adored. A man they called Sunshine Charlie, America's most charming, most beloved banker. A man who seemed like he could single-handedly brighten the economy with a smile. His name was Charles Edwin Mitchell. He did not intend to destroy anything. He did not dream of collapse, hunger, or ruined families. If anything, he wanted the opposite. A wealthy, confident America where every citizen could share in the nation's prosperity. But intentions don't save economies. Systems do. And the system Mitchell built would one day unravel with horrifying speed. The Great Depression lasted a decade. It scarred an entire generation. 25 million Americans lost their jobs. Thousands of banks died, taking with them the life savings of countless families. Millions wandered the country in search of work, shelter, food, any sign that the nightmare might end. But while history books often skip straight to Black Thursday, the deeper question remains. How did such a disaster become possible at all? To answer that, we must go back. Back to the era of confidence and champagne, jazz and skyscrapers. The roaring decade when America believed that wealth had finally become eternal. Because that's where Mitchell stepped onto the stage. And that's where the seeds of catastrophe were planted. The 1920s in America were a time when the future felt unstoppable. Cities climbed higher into the sky with new steel bones. Jazz spilled from bars onto crowded sidewalks. Ford's assembly lines pushed out cars so quickly that even school teachers could afford one. Radios crackled in living rooms from New York to Kansas, bringing music, news, and advertisements that promised an easier, brighter tomorrow. It was an era soaked in optimism. To many, it felt like the country had discovered a secret formula for endless growth. And in the middle of this frenzy of progress stood a man who looked like he belonged in a magazine cover story about the American dream itself. Charles Edwin Mitchell. Born in 1877 in rural Massachusetts to a modest farming family, nothing about his upbringing predicted power or influence. He wasn't born into wealth. He didn't inherit a dynasty. He built himself, brick by brick, ambition by ambition. By 1919, Mitchell had risen so high that he was placed at the head of National City Bank, the largest bank in the United States. Its assets were staggering, more than most national economies at the time. He was confident, charismatic, and relentlessly modern. The kind of man who stepped into a room and instantly convinced you he knew where the future was headed. And Mitchell believed he had discovered something extraordinary. A way to transform the financial world. A way to redefine wealth. A way to let ordinary people, clerks, farmers, mechanics, take part in the booming prosperity of the nation. At the time, the stock market was an exclusive club. Only about 500,000 Americans owned shares, less than 1% of the population. Investing was a playground for the ultra-rich. Ordinary people kept their savings in banks or bought safe government bonds. To most, Wall Street was distant, mysterious, and irrelevant. But Mitchell looked at this landscape and saw something else. An untapped ocean of opportunity. Why should wealth belong only to the wealthy? He asked. What if anyone, could become a capitalist? What if the stock market wasn't a fortress but a storefront? What if America's prosperity could be shared by the entire nation? It sounded noble. It sounded democratic. And it would change everything. In 1920, Mitchell created a new branch inside his financial empire. National City Company, an outfit designed to bring Wall Street directly to Main Street. Their mission was simple and revolutionary. Sell stocks to ordinary people. Right in the bank lobby. Right next to where they opened checking accounts or bought savings certificates. Banking was no longer just a place to store money. It was where you could multiply it. Or so people believed. Mitchell studied human desires with the precision of a scientist. He understood dreams better than most politicians. He knew people didn't just want stability, they wanted a chance. A hope. A shot at a better life. So he hired not just bankers but dream merchants. Salesmen trained in psychology, persuasion, and storytelling. They didn't speak the dull language of finance. They sold visions of the future: bigger homes, early retirement, proud children, new cars. People walked into banks to deposit $5 and walked out as first-time investors. It felt empowering. It felt modern. It felt like the American dream was finally open to everyone. But behind the warm glow of this idea was a mechanism that would soon spin out of control. A mechanism built not on savings or caution, but on debt. The era of mass speculation had just begun, and Charles Mitchell stood proudly at its center. Mitchell's revolution didn't simply open the doors of Wall Street. It blasted them off their hinges. National City Company didn't just sell stocks. It manufactured desire. Posters filled bank lobbies, smiling families in front of new homes, polished cars, children running across freshly cut lawns. Newspaper ads promised: become an investor for only $15 a month. Let your money work for you. Own a piece of America's greatest companies. It was irresistible. But the true brilliance and the true danger of Mitchell's system lay in one innovation that changed the psychology of investing forever: margin buying. Before Mitchell, you bought stocks the same way you bought groceries. You paid in full. Mitchell changed the formula. Now anyone could buy stocks by putting down just 10% of the price. The bank would lend the remaining 90. Felt magical. Have $100? Buy $1,000 worth of stock. The stock went up. You didn't just win, you won big. Salesmen showed simple, seductive math. Mr. Brown invested $50, bought shares worth $500, and earned $150 in 6 months. That's a 300% return. And what did your savings account give you? $15? Every conversation ended like a challenge. Do you really want to work for someone else all your life, when your money could be working for you? America listened. And America believed. Teachers invested their salaries. Farmers mortgaged land to buy General Motors shares. Factory workers pooled money to speculate on radio companies. Even housewives secretly pawned jewelry to join the boom. From 1925 to 1929, loans used to buy stocks exploded from $2 billion to $8.5 billion, a 425% increase. The number of shareholders soared from 500,000 to 10 million. 10 million people convinced they had found a shortcut to wealth. 10 million people standing on a financial cliff they couldn't see. And Mitchell became a national hero. Magazines called him a visionary. Wall Street called him a genius. Ordinary Americans called him the man who finally gave them a chance. In 1928 alone, he earned the equivalent of $20 million today. But Mitchell wasn't done. He introduced another layer: investment trusts. These trusts borrowed money to buy stocks, whose shares were then bought by ordinary people, also on borrowed money. A pyramid of optimism built on a foundation of loans. As long as stock prices rose, the machine purred smoothly. But the truth was simple, cold, mathematical. For every dollar invested, only 10 cents were real. The rest was debt waiting for gravity. And by 1929, that gravity was getting stronger. Because beneath the glittering stock tickers, the real economy, the one of factories, farms, cars, and homes, was slowing down. But the market? It kept rising like a balloon pumped by a hand that refused to stop. A balloon that no one realized was already stretched thin. By early 1929, even the loudest cheerleaders of Wall Street felt something unsettling in the air. Stock prices were soaring into the stratosphere. But the real economy was quietly slowing down. Factories reported declining production. Car sales dipped for the first time in years. New home construction slumped. Farmers struggled with falling crop prices. Yet the market didn't care. The Dow kept climbing as if tethered to some invisible balloon, rising higher, 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 while its rope, the real economy, frayed strand by strand. Economists whispered about a bubble. But Mitchell? Mitchell insisted everything was fine. After all, tens of billions of dollars depended on the illusion that stocks could rise forever. And illusions, once big enough, can drown out reality. But in February 1929, the Federal Reserve finally broke the silence. A warning shot. Stop issuing loans for stock speculation. Margin credit had grown too fast. Too much was borrowed. Too much was at risk. Wall Street trembled. For the first time, fear crept in. Stocks began to fall. Not catastrophically, but enough to make millions of new investors sweat. Billions evaporated in days. Newspapers spoke of panic. And for a moment, it looked like the bubble might deflate harmlessly. But then came March 12, 1929. A day that might have saved America. Or doomed it. That morning, Charles Mitchell walked into a room full of journalists and delivered a statement with the confidence of a man who believed he could personally hold up the sky. National City Bank will provide all the liquidity the market needs. We will not allow an unnecessary crisis. The effect was electric. Within hours, headlines screamed, "Sunshine Charlie saves Wall Street." Market stabilized by Mitchell's heroic move. And the market, grateful, relieved, reckless, surged upward again. The message was clear. If anything went wrong, Mitchell would step in. He had done it once. He would do it again. Investors felt invincible. Stocks skyrocketed. The bubble stretched until its surface shimmered like glass. In the summer of 1929, the Dow hit an all-time high of 381 points, a record untouched for the next quarter century. Millions who had never touched a stock before now rushed into the market. College students, barbers, mechanics, secretaries. Shoeshine boys offered stock tips with the confidence of fund managers. It felt like the entire country had turned into a casino where everyone was winning. But beneath the laughter and champagne, danger hummed like a hidden electric wire. When 90% of the market's money is borrowed, all it takes is a 10% drop to wipe out millions. And by autumn, the smartest investors began quietly walking toward the exits. They saw what others refused to notice. The widening gap between prices and reality. The fragile towers of debt. The Federal Reserve preparing to raise interest rates. The British Central Bank tightening money abroad. They knew gravity always wins. They sold slowly at first, then deliberately, then urgently. And by late October, the pressure was unbearable. The bubble was no longer rising. It was trembling, waiting for the smallest spark to explode. And then came October 24, 1929. A morning like any other, until the largest investment houses in New York made a coordinated, deadly decision. Exit. No. They began dumping enormous blocks of shares onto the market. Hundreds of thousands at a time. Silently at first, then in torrents. Prices slipped, then slid, then collapsed like wet paper. By mid-morning, fear turned to chaos. Brokers were drowning in sell orders they couldn't execute fast enough. Phone lines jammed beyond capacity. Messages from across the country simply didn't go through. The financial system, supposedly the most advanced in the world, choked under its own weight. 13 million shares were traded in a single day. 5 times the normal volume. A historic, horrifying cascade. But the numbers, as terrifying as they were, don't tell the human story. They don't tell what it felt like to watch your savings, your future, your security, vanish in the space of a morning. They don't tell how ordinary Americans suddenly realized that the dream they'd been sold was built on borrowed money, borrowed hope, and borrowed time. The margin system that Mitchell popularized worked like a row of dominoes. First domino. Stock prices fall. Banks demand more collateral from investors. Second domino. Ordinary people don't have extra cash. They panic and sell. Third domino. Selling pushes prices down further. Collateral becomes worthless. Fourth domino. Banks stop lending. Liquidity evaporates. Financial institutions begin to fail. The very mechanism designed to democratize wealth had become a machine of destruction, automatic, merciless. And then came October 29th, known forever as Black Tuesday. The final collapse. In a single day, America lost another $14 billion. More than the nation had spent on World War I. People rushed to banks, demanding answers, demanding help, but the banks themselves were suffocating. Some wouldn't live to see the end of the week. Behind every statistic was a life shattered. Edward Hopkins, a mechanic from Detroit who put $5,000, his lifetime savings, into Ford stock. By November it was worth $200. The bank demanded a $3,000 margin payment he didn't have. He was found in his garage having chosen a rope over ruin. Mary Field, a schoolteacher from Ohio. She mortgaged her aging parents' home to buy shares in a booming radio company. After the crash, the bank reclaimed the house. 3 generations ended up on the street. In New York, the lines weren't only at the banks. They were on the bridges, the last stations of despair. The Brooklyn Bridge became a grim symbol of dreams turned to dust. People who had thought themselves wealthy just weeks earlier now leapt into the cold river below. This was not a financial correction. It was an emotional earthquake that tore through the heart of a nation. America woke up to the brutal truth. Wealth built on credit can disappear faster than anyone imagines. And the man once praised as a savior, the smiling banker with the optimistic speeches and revolutionary ideas, was suddenly the face of blame. Charles Mitchell, Sunshine Charlie, the architect of mass investing, was about to face the consequences of the world he unknowingly created. In the years that followed the crash, the glitter faded, and the nation began searching for someone to blame. And there, standing at the center of the wreckage, was the man who once promised prosperity for all. Charles Edwin Mitchell. Sunshine Charlie. The banker who wanted to make every American an investor. In 1933 he was summoned before Congress. Senator Carter Glass leaned forward and asked the question the whole country whispered. Do you consider yourself responsible for the ruin of millions of American families? Mitchell didn't flinch. I wanted to give people the opportunity to become rich, he replied. No one forced them to buy stocks. It was a cold answer for a country still bleeding. The public hated him. On the streets of New York, crowds booed as he passed. Newspapers called him the architect of financial catastrophe. The man who stole the future of a generation. A Detroit paper wrote bitterly, bank robbers take a bag of money. Mitchell took our children's hopes. But others defended him. Businessmen argued that he didn't force greed upon the nation, people chose it willingly. His colleagues insisted he was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Still, justice came knocking. In 1933, Mitchell was put on trial for tax evasion. He was disgraced, stripped of influence, and exiled from the financial world he once ruled. He moved to Europe, working quietly for small banks. Later, he returned to the U.S. and founded a modest investment firm, a shadow of his former empire. When he died in 1955 at the age of 78, he still refused to admit he played any role in triggering the Great Depression. But history had already passed its judgment. The world he helped create changed forever. In response to the catastrophe, the U.S. government transformed its financial system. The Glass-Steagall Act separated commercial banks from investment banks. No more gambling with depositors' money. The Securities and Exchange Commission was created to police the markets. Deposit insurance protected ordinary people from losing everything. Margin trading became heavily restricted, ending the era of 10% down payments for mountains of debt. And yet, nearly a century later, America is again dancing to a familiar tune. 50 million people trade stocks on their smartphones. Margin debt has reached nearly $900 billion. Apps like Robinhood promise exactly what Mitchell once did. Everyone can be an investor. Zero commissions. Trade like a pro. A new generation buys crypto, meme stocks, leveraged ETFs, often with money that isn't entirely theirs. Borrowed capital. Borrowed confidence. Borrowed time. Just like in 1929. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it rhymes with uncomfortable precision. And the story of Charles Mitchell, the man who tried to democratize wealth and instead helped usher in a catastrophe, still whispers a warning. Good intentions don't protect you from dangerous systems. Easy money always has a price. And the lessons we ignore are the ones that return to break us. If you want to explore more forgotten stories, hidden financial disasters, and the lessons history keeps trying to teach us, subscribe to Finance Archives. There are many more untold stories ahead.